Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. Sorry about the audio last week. I really have no idea what happened. I think it was an OBS bug or something, so I ended up creating an offline portable version of OBS that I'll never update. I'll just leave it working well enough to do the weeklies. And also, I'm going to go back to listening with my headphones because I guess the speakers I have are so crappy that they didn't even pick up the popping noises. But after I listened to it, I didn't even realize there was an audio issue, and then it was on the original files, so I couldn't even re-render and re-upload or anything like that. So hopefully that'll be the last time anything like that ever happens. But let's jump into the Q&As, hopefully audio issue free. Rolf was interested in trying to go from HDMI to composite video, and they were looking for different solutions that don't scale improperly or add lag. And there is a scaler out there from LinuxBot 3000 on eBay that can go from VGA or RGB to composite video. I've never tried it before, but you would obviously need to feed it some kind of 240p signal. And that link that you provided shows how to have custom timings on NVIDIA video cards to do, I guess, what they call super resolution, a really wide horizontal resolution with a normal vertical resolution, 240. And that fools most CRTs into thinking it's just a standard 240p signal. And I have not tried it with this, but it should work. I don't think, or I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't. Of course, you could just use an HDMI to component video converter if you have that, or get an arcade VGA card, which you could set it to always output in 240p. And then something like this most certainly would work because then you're just doing VGA to composite. So it's a pretty cool idea. Any kind of basic signal conversion like that should always be zero lag. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. But yeah, I would just, step one is making sure that your video card can absolutely output correct 240p. Try it out first. Hopefully you have some way of testing it. And then once you've confirmed that, then you could definitely give this thing a shot and see if that'll work for you. I'd love to follow up and do a video on that as well myself, just out of curiosity, because I think a lot of people with any kind of emulation solution at all would probably be interested in that, because then you could just use any consumer grade TV you pick up. Frank Aguayo wanted to follow up with the discussion last week about power distribution units and suggested two models from the company Pile and one from the company Triplite. And it's something that I would definitely like to test at some point. I'm just not sure when I'm going to have the time, but I think adding power distribution units and remote control for each plug is something that would be pretty awesome, depending on your setup, if that's something that you need. So I'll try to look into it at some point, but much appreciate the suggestion. Oliver Clare said they recently had a long conversation with a fellow retro gaming enthusiast about NTSC versus PAL standards and how they affect console performance from the second generation until around the Dreamcast era. They concluded that, with a few exceptions, for most consoles, the majority of their gaming libraries would have been programmed originally with NTSC in mind, and then converted to PAL after the fact, as opposed to something like the Amstrad GX4000, whose games would have been built from the ground up for PAL, and that these conversions will vary greatly in quality. With that in mind, and assuming all other things are equal, like your PAL TV is capable of accepting NTSC signals and you've got your networking figured out, your power networking figured out, is there an argument to be made from a PAL user's perspective for importing an NTSC console and region-free modding it to play your PAL games, instead of region-free modding a PAL console to play NTSC exclusives? Atari 2600 and Sega Genesis are a few examples to consider. So that's really going to be preference, and I would personally make the decision based on either money or convenience. So is it just cheaper to buy a couple of different consoles? Is it worth the convenience factor for you to install something like a region mod inside a Sega Genesis that allows you to switch between regions and speeds and stuff like that? I would just kind of approach it from that perspective and kind of figure out what fits best for your needs. And the debate of playing PAL versus NTSC games is really down to the game itself very often. I know there's a lot of different discussions about how Sonic the Hedgehog plays slower and the music's slower on PAL versions, and there's certainly different things going on with a lot of Nintendo titles as well. So that's kind of an interesting one, and that's just kind of all preference based. But I would definitely just first think, like, what's the cheapest and easiest way to go about doing this. And with consoles like the Genesis, it might just be easier to get one of each, and then just use a universal power supply like the Triads, so you don't have to worry about converting the power from each region. You could just use buy the power supply with a connector for your region and then just go from there. Oliver also had a question about power supplies that I kind of just touched upon already. I didn't scroll down and see your second question, which, I really do like reading these and answering them in real time, but that's also the side effect of it is sometimes I don't realize that right underneath there's another question that fits in. So anyway, as far as power supplies go, you could use converters, you could figure out which are universal power supplies, but it's my opinion that if you're messing with consoles from different regions, just buy something like the Triads that are proven to work well. They're not just some weird no-name brand without a UL sticker, and just match it up to your console and just buy the power supply for your region and then the pigtail adapter for the console, and that should be the best solution for everything. It's a bit tricky with stuff like the N64 because I don't know of any good replacements for those yet, but for the most part, it should be pretty easy to figure it all out. Lopo has a Blue Snowball microphone, and they know it's basic and cheap, but they were looking for a way to make it sound better because it seems to be picking up a lot of background noise. So I'm pretty sure I could help, and by the way, I do like answering all kinds of questions, including stuff like this, because anybody that's listened to the podcast for a while was probably annoyed to death of all of my testing and talking about different microphones I've used. So I'm really happy that, the millions of hours I've spent trying to tweak my setup might actually help somebody else, so you don't have to spend all those crazy amount of hours doing it. So there's two answers to your question. Well, a couple actually. First, the Blue Snowball is a good microphone, but it's not the best. I tested that, and I ended up finding that the regular Blue Yeti was quite a big of a step up from that. And then, of course, the higher end microphones plus an interface is going to be an even bigger step than that. But it's not a bad microphone at all. I just wanted to bring that up because if whatever you're using it for becomes something that's really important to you, keep in the back of your mind that you're eventually going to need to upgrade. To answer your question directly, one thing that you could always do to improve on background noise and overall sound is post-process the audio, or I guess you could do some real-time processing, but you're going to have to learn some different ways of software filtering. OBS has new filters for audio as well that works very similar to the NVIDIA's RTS voice. I guess that's best if you're doing live stuff. If you're doing anything pre-recorded, then you could just export audio only and then run it through some noise filtering and compression. And Epos Vox has really great guides for all of this stuff. He actually kind of very patiently taught me how to do this in my workflow, and every single video I do now is filtered like that. So, and I think it has made a big difference. So absolutely check out Epos Vox's channel. The other thing that you could think about doing is, depending on if you're on camera or not, there's different ways that you could place the microphone. So if you're doing audio only recording, you could buy one of those sound isolation boxes, which is essentially like a cardboard box with noise dampening in it. And you could just place the mic inside of that and talk into it. A trick that I use on every video that doesn't have this microphone, I'll make sure that I have the same shirt that I would wear on camera and have the lapel mic placed in the exact same spot to try to keep things consistent. But then I'll go into the bedroom, open up the closet, and talk into the clothes, which does a great job muffling background noise. So you can try to just set up your mic in the closet if that works for you. It's kind of funny, too, because even in some of the videos, you could hear me when I lean in and accidentally hit one of the hangers. You could hear them clang together. But overall, I found that to be really great. However, if you're on mic and you can't do anything like that, the software processing is definitely important. But also look into different microphones, and both Epos Vox and Podcastage are two channels that are great for that. You could check out different audio interfaces and everything. And for me personally, I found that the Rode Procaster, I think that's what this one's called. I have a link to it in the Amazon store, but this through the Motu M4, which should also be the same as the Motu M2, has been the best overall setup for me, and it's the best at filtering out background noise. I don't know if you could hear it, there's a jackhammer kind of down the street and a truck idling outside, and I don't think this would pick it up. I've definitely tested microphones that sounded better, and of course, Podcastage and Epos Vox test a ton of different mics. But as far as you're stuck in an environment where you can't filter out any more noise, just like this, that's definitely the one I would recommend. And I love the Motu, the M series. I think they're just absolutely awesome interfaces. But, that's a giant price difference from the Blue Snowball. So I would start with software audio processing, either right in OBS Live or post-processing through, I use Premiere or Audition, part of the Adobe suite, but Epos Vox has videos teaching you how to do that in free software like Audacity. And it was very close to as good. So hopefully I was able to point you in the right direction. And definitely, if anybody has questions about this stuff, please keep it coming, because I've learned so much over the past few years, and I've bugged my friends with a million questions who are experts in this stuff to try to tweak setups like this. And I feel like I'm really proud of the setup that I have for environments like this, where you kind of got to just work with what you have. And I also feel like I've spent a lot less than many other people would lead you to believe that you have to spend. It's still kind of expensive, but you definitely don't need to drop thousands to make it sound decent. Ishan wants to know if I've been in the retro modding scene back in the 90s. They're curious to know when people started getting RGB signals out of consoles into a professional video monitor. The tech was available since the 90s, so it's possible, but I understand the monitors were extremely expensive back then and wouldn't have been used by hobbyists. Would love to hear your thoughts. So, my discovery into RGB was going into a store called Electronics Boutique at the Trumbull Mall in Connecticut, and walking in and seeing, it was one of the Sonic the Hedgehog games. I'm guessing Sonic 3, and it looked great on the demo monitor they had there. And I asked the guy behind the counter, hey, what monitor are you using that's really cool? And I think it was a professional video monitor. It wasn't a PVM, but it was something like a higher end monitor that also had composite input and stuff like that. And the kid behind the counter, he was probably only a few years older than me, was like, yeah, this looks good, but you've got to see it in RGB. It looks way better. And I remembered at the time, I'm like, hey, the back of my computer, my Tandy 1000 has an RGB connector, and I'm pretty sure it's an RGB monitor connected to it as well. So I went out, and at the time, this was really early in the internet. This was, whenever Sonic 3 came out, so you couldn't really Google stuff back then. So I went to Radio Shack to try to find a converter that would allow me to get it into the RGB monitor, and that's where my quest stopped, because even if I had found a converter, or if I had found pinouts, there was no info back then on where, especially in the US, where to get RGB connectors, how to wire them and all that stuff. So I kind of just put that in the back of my mind. And then when I started RetroRGB, right before that, I built what I called the Retro Cart with, just a composite video TV on there and a bunch of consoles. And then I just thought, hey, what about that RGB thing? I remember that from when I was a kid, and I don't think I ever saw one in person like that. So that's kind of what brought me down the road of this. So I wasn't RGB modding in the 90s, but that is kind of the root of this. And as far as getting RGB signals out of consoles, I mean, if you were in Europe, you would just buy an RGB SCART cable and plug it in that way. And a lot of magazines even advertised that as well. Improve the picture quality of your console. Buy this RGB SCART cable for your Mega Drive or something like that. So it just wasn't really a thing at all in the US, and not anything that I had ever heard of as a kid. Funny though, while I wasn't into retro modding, my first website ever was called the Emulatorium. I have no idea how I came up with that stupid name, but it was essentially RetroRGB 1.0. It was a website that kept everybody updated with whatever emulators had new updates released for them. And it was just a weird little hobby as a kid, where I would check out all of the websites of all of the different Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and other emulators out there. And whenever I saw an update, I would post an update on the site. It was a GeoCities website for any other old people listening. And so yeah, while I wasn't modding back in the 90s, I was still in the scene, kind of doing very similar things to what I'm doing now, which I don't know if that means I never grew up or what, but but yeah, I've kind of been around for a while. Blackguard wants to know if HD Retrovision's PS1 and Saturn adapters can be used with the Genesis 2 SCART cable. I really wouldn't recommend it because each one of those cables has different components in it, slightly different components that are designed for each of those consoles. So while it might work, it probably wouldn't look right, and those were really designed to be used with the Genesis HD Retrovision cables. So if it does work, it might not look right, so I just kind of wouldn't recommend doing that at all. Brento wants to know more information about the SNES RGB clarity issue, and I'll give you the quick rundown of it. So almost every single one of the Super Nintendo consoles and Super Famicoms has kind of a blurry output to it. I'm not really sure why. There's been lots of speculation, but the later model one-chip consoles, as well as the Mini, outputs very, very sharp RGB. The Mini requires a mod, but it's quite easy to do. And there's a few weird little quirks with using the one chip, but not at all anything that would stop you from enjoying the experience. There were a few threads online that a couple years ago that got it all wrong. I actually don't even know how they made that mistake, but overall, the one chip consoles are really, really sharp, and that would be my recommendation at the moment for people looking to get the sharpest video quality out of it. There are a few people looking into mods for the original models, though, and there's been a few people out there that are doing it one way, but it's not really a good way to go about doing it because it only works in some scenarios and not others. And in my opinion, it's really just kind of a waste of time and effort unless you just enjoy modding projects and want to see if you could do it. But there is one project specifically for the original 2-chip, 3-chip, whatever you want to refer to it as. But I think it's only the SHVC editions. But I have that mod coming in. I'm going to be testing it, and that should be a true RGB mod that really fixes the clarity issues on all of the original Super Nintendos. I got to test it. I got to write a guide for it and all that stuff. So in the short term, grab a Mini or try to hunt down a one chip. It's just easier to get a Mini because they're all the same. Or if you're patient and you really want to just use your original consoles, wait to test this other one. I imagine it would be at least a month before I could get to that. But I'm really interested in that as well because the Super Nintendo is my favorite console. So anything I could do to tweak it to make it better, I'm definitely interested in. The GOAT would like to know if I could recommend places to sell pre-modded consoles. They've modded up a few DC HDMIs, Universe BIOS, power supply recaps, etc., and they would prefer to avoid the eBay tax if possible. I have no idea, and I'm sorry, I mean that respectfully. eBay is a nightmare. eBay for me has been mostly just a hellish experience, and I've been doing it since it pretty much came out. And 1 out of 5 things that I sell, it's a terrible experience, and eBay treats their sellers very, very badly. And there's also the stigma of eBay consoles. There's just so much junk on there from people that have no clue at all what they're doing. There's even people that are terrible and still selling on there and still even showing pictures of their terribly modded consoles. And I just have no idea how people could still buy that stuff. So the whole eBay stigma is something I'd avoid. As far as where to go to sell them, I got no clue. You could try looking into forums and their buy and sell sections, but definitely post a bunch of detailed pictures. And I would even... I honestly would take pictures of each individual console. So let's say you modded 4 Super Nintendo Minis for RGB. I wouldn't just put one picture. I would actually take the time to put pictures of each one just to show people that, hey, I'm actually doing this correctly and I took my time and this is exactly what you're buying. I know that's a pain, but there's so much junk out there that I think if you're doing a good job, you should really spend that extra time to show people the job that you did. And I would also kind of keep that in the back of your mind as part of the modding process. So don't just think, oh, this mod takes 2 hours. Think, all right, well, if it's going to take an extra 20 minutes to take pictures and write a write-up, consider the mod to be a 2-hour and 20-minute mod. So, sorry I don't have a direct answer, but hopefully I had some decent enough basic advice. Frank Aguayo wants to know if there's a video processor or emulator that can replicate the look of a composite or RF signal. There's actually lots of filters for RetroArch, however you say it, that are very good CRT filters. I was very impressed with the Polymegas filters as well. I believe they have a beta update now for even more filters. I got to check that out. But Emulation's by far the easiest way to get these filters at the moment. At some point, hopefully, we'll be able to get a lot more detailed CRT emulation through video processors. It's a bit more complicated because you have to in order to properly do this, you have to emulate both the horizontal and vertical scan lines. And yes, I know people very often get frustrated because there's no such thing as vertical scan lines, but what I'm talking about is the mask of the CRT itself. So whether it's the shadow mask or aperture grill, if you take macro photos of it, or if you really just get your face close up, you could see how each of the characters are drawn on screen very specifically, and how this changes when using composite, RF, S-video, RGB, and the filters on emulation right now, software emulation at least, are very, very good and can do a pretty good job, especially if you're sitting far enough back. It really does feel like a CRT. As far as the scalers go, they normally just have horizontal lines across the screen, which I'm not really a fan of because it doesn't look the same way that the mask of a CRT does. So I generally don't use them at all. The ones that I did use were like in the Game Boy Advance consolizer that has both horizontal and vertical scan lines to look just like the LCD panel. But at the moment, emulation is definitely the best way to go for those filters. And hopefully in the future, we could use real hardware in order to emulate all of that stuff on, especially on flat panels. You also mentioned maybe using RGB and having it look like composite on a CRT. Honestly, I wouldn't even bother. I mean that respectfully. I would just, if you have access to a CRT, I would just grab a composite video cable and kind of go from there. Arcade UK said that when I was talking to Beast about Neo Geo in the MVS Arcade video, I mentioned that there were some good Supergun options available for Neo Geo boards. I was wondering if you could do a quick summary of what's out there. Apologies if you've already covered this topic. I've been out of the loop for a while. I haven't covered the topic. It's something I want to do, and I've actually spoken to a bunch of people that make these different Supergun solutions to try and schedule a video about it at some point. I am very, very backlogged at the moment. It's a little overwhelming, so I really want to dig myself out of the hole that I've got myself into, but I will gladly do a quick rundown. So if you're only worried about using Neo Geo specifically and not a wide variety of arcade boards and not dealing with a wide variety of sync signals and button mappings and all that stuff, your choices for Neo Geo get very cheap in a good way, as well as very high quality, because those Superguns, which you could probably use them with other arcade boards, but since they're designed for the Neo Geo, everything's already tweaked and ready for you. So at the moment, there's somebody on eBay, Cyril Vendetti. I can't remember if that's his eBay name as well. He makes some really great kits that he basically sells the parts and you solder them all together. I think he has a few pre-made, but mostly just sells the kits. So if you're looking for a project, that's a very cheap way to get this, because you could just put it all together yourself and you'd have it all taken care of. The Behar brothers have their kits that are coming out, and I think they also have the VGA kit as well. They said they're going to send me some stuff to test, which I will absolutely make time to test both of those. I think there's a few other ones out there. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that Tian Fong, I'm so sorry, man. I always pronounce your name wrong. I'll get it right one of these days. But T's got one that he's working on that I've been testing for 2 years now, and there's just been some logistics as to they should have been out already. They should have been out last year. Partially my fault, partially one of the companies that we're working with to try to get them made. But I think the end goal for that project is open source, as well as have at least one company sell them pre-made for people, which I think is awesome. And then there's a couple of other kits out or in the works that I don't think I'm allowed to talk about yet, but they're more of a complete solution based around MV1B and MV1C motherboards. So you could kind of very easily consolize it to have a professional look. So if you had one of those smaller boards, and there's other projects that already exist like that as well. I believe Cyril's eBay store has some stuff like that look really good for the Bs, the MV1B, the front-loading ones. But the other ones specifically, you would be able to just take the MV1C motherboard and make it look like a console. And of course, if you have any of the older model boards, you would just use any of the other Superguns I just mentioned. So my apologies for the half-assed rundown. but I will absolutely have more info on this stuff at some point soon, because I just really enjoy Neo Geo hardware, and I think it's really cool that for the first time ever, you don't need to drop $1 million every time you say the words Neo Geo. It's not cheap, but you could pick up a couple of MVS carts, an old motherboard, and one of these Superguns, and have yourself a really good solution for less than the price of an AES. So I'll keep everybody updated, and hopefully I'll have a much better video on that at some point soon. Clint Collage said they noticed the other day on Beast's Instagram that he picked up a new Supergun called the Ashen CBox, which looks like it handles both JAMA and JVS standards, with integrated power as well as controller I/O, power, and JVS control output. It's also been talked about recently in Smoke Monster's arcade channel on Discord, and the initial thoughts seem to be positive but skeptical. Have I had time to check it out, and is this something to consider? And is it something to consider in the addition to the minigun and the Hass? They just went through setting up a Naomi NetBoot setup, and having an all-in-one Supergun that handles all of the JVS complexities would be great, but for JAMA specifically, I'm always concerned about the safety of the output signals, so I don't kill my G-SCART switch light. So, yeah, so there's a bit of backstory about this. Ashenworks contacted me about their switch, about their converter, and about this Supergun, and I committed to reviewing all of them, knowing that, I would be doing the SCART switch shootout video that I did, knowing that the converter that goes from RGB to composite, that would be like a day's project, and also knowing that the CBox would be a very, very long time, or it would take a long time to test it. So when they originally contacted me about it, I had a pretty clear schedule, and I said, yeah, send it over immediately, and I'll actually go to, I said, send it to Beast, I'll go to his house, and we'll spend a full day going through and testing everything, and then I'll come back and gather info and do a video on it. But overall, it would be days and days of testing. For one reason or another, we didn't actually receive it for months, and by the time it came in, I was already drowning in other projects. So I feel really bad because I did absolutely commit to reviewing it. I have not had the time to it, and they did a good job getting it out to me, but no disrespect to them whatsoever, but if they had sent it to me right away, the video would have been done right away, and now I have no idea when I could even get to it. But to answer your questions about safety, that's the one thing that I'm always skeptical about. And I mean that with respect, because Ashen is, he's made some amazing stuff so far, and I have had pretty much no complaints, but anytime you talk about arcade stuff, there's so much that goes into this. So specifically, the original versions of the Hass were awesome, but you still might have the audio voltage issue if you don't know how to set audio levels properly. I did a video on that as well with Steve. That's one of my favorite videos too. Very few views on that one, but I loved how we really got into the technical side of it. The newest revision of the Hass, or maybe the last two revisions actually, has audio protection built in, as does the minigun, so you don't have to worry about that at all. And that's one of the main things I want to check on the Ashenworks CBox. What are the voltages of RGBS? What happens when we use a bunch of different arcade boards? Does that change drastically, or does it only change a little bit? Is there audio protection built in? And basically go through all of that stuff. And I was going to let Beast kind of take the reins about features, because he has the equipment and the experience with a lot of the JVS stuff to explain it. And I was just going to kind of take on the side of safety testing and making sure it all worked. But I have no idea when I'm going to be able to get to that. And especially with lockdown too, I try not to put my friends at risk, and I am still kind of all over the place. I wear a mask and all that stuff, wash my hands and crap. But I just sitting in a small room with somebody all day long testing something, I don't know. I try to minimize that as much as I can, and just to try to be polite about it. I haven't been sick. My friends haven't been sick, but whatever. I'm just trying to be polite. So that's a very long way of saying I'll get to it eventually, but I have no idea when. And if anybody else out there has one and is a reviewer, please beat me to the punch. I would love to see your thoughts on it. I would just also really love to see somebody throw it on an oscilloscope to test both audio and video voltages. Daniel said they're looking for some advice on finding Tioudan CDRs. They're planning on burning PS1 and Dreamcast backups and found that those were the best media out there, but they stopped making them in 2015. They've seen resellers having some stock, but I'm not sure if it's all legit. So the question is, do I know of or have any reliable source on where to find those Tioudan CDRs? And if not, which other brand would you recommend? I've seen there's also another brand called CMC, which claims to be powered by TY Tech, but I'm not sure if I have any more insight on that. I have some very bad news for you. Not only do I have no idea if there's another brand that's worth buying, I've had people tell me that sellers have just been marking CDs as Tioudan, and then they get them, and they're very clearly not. They're like Staples brand or something. So I have no good advice for you other than look into the X Station for the PS1 and either the mode or the GDMU. I forgot. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but look into optical drive emulators for both, and you'll never have to worry about burning any of this stuff. Especially with the PS1, it's got such a big library, and the X Station is fairly priced. But I do 100% understand that is kind of a complicated install. But overall, I mean, if you're really going to be using a lot of backups or translations or anything like that, it's worth it. And you don't have to worry about your laser dying. Loading times are faster on the X Station. Dreamcast, all the solutions for Dreamcast that I have tested are plug and play. So that's much easier. So that's definitely something to look into, because as long as you have a screwdriver, you could install this yourself. So that's, I would absolutely recommend going the optical drive emulator route over burned discs for all of those reasons, including the fact that it's really hard to find good media anymore. And also, thanks very much for the kind words. Welcome to the Patreon. Monty was trying to find a solution for their Dreamcast that allowed them to switch resolutions without actually having to switch something. So the Dreamcast can output 480p as well as 240p and 480i, and there's some SCART cable solutions out there as well as some VGA boxes that allow you to switch between them because it's a physical connection. There's no software that tells it to go to one resolution or the other. You have to actually have that cable plugged in. The Dreamcast will read which cable's plugged in and set the resolution that way. So there really isn't a way to make that happen without any kind of manual switch. I do like how the two SCART cables that are out now have the switch on the console end of things. So you just reach behind your console before you power it on and select what resolution. So that's very easy. I think that's probably the best method. The Dreamcast HD RetroVision cables have a switch that's right behind the input as well. So that's fairly easy. You could use the DC digital if you wanted to go through the trouble to do that, but you would still have to have some kind of manual interaction. So, for example, you install the DC digital, then you have like an HDMI to VGA output converter, and then whenever you're playing a game like Banjo that requires it to be in 240p, then you could just, I think that's the case with it. But anyway, if you have a game that only runs in the lower resolution, you could just set the DC digital to cable detect, and with no cable plugged in, it'll default to that lower mode, and then it would actually work. And then if you wanted to force everything to 480p, you could just set that mode as well. But that's still a manual interaction. And while it doesn't bother me at all, my thought on this is if you're having a totally analog solution going into a PVM or a VGA monitor, since there's some kind of interaction anyway, you might as well just get a cable with a switch on it. I believe there's an eBay seller that makes a pretty good quality VGA cable with a switch right next to the console side of things as well. Now, of course, if you were looking to do streaming or HDMI output as well, then yeah, sure, just use the DC digital for everything. Use an HDMI splitter, have one go to your capture card or flat panel TV, and then have the other go to an HDMI to VGA converter, and then you could just do everything manually that way. So hopefully I kind of pointed you in the right direction on that. It's an interesting question, but no, you're always going to have some kind of manual interaction whenever you're playing the games that will not run in VGA mode. A few questions from Jason Guffey. First, they were looking for a recommendation on a modder in the Chicago area. I can't remember who lives where. I'm so sorry. So I guess if anybody's watching this knows a good console modder around Chicago, maybe post below and let everybody know. You could, of course, just go to any of the services that allow you to send your console in. So, rather than drive it over, you could just mail it. I know that makes some people nervous, but, mostly 99% of the time that works out okay. And it's always frustrating finding a good, reputable modder. And very often when the word gets out of someone like that, they get super busy and aren't able to handle the tons of work going their way. So sorry, I don't really have any direct recommendations, but I would just kind of see if anybody could point you in the right direction, or just go through any of the normal services. Also, another question. I know this is something John Linneman has talked about before, but do you happen to have any recommendations for external video DACs for playing modern games on VGA CRT monitors? It's my understanding that a cheap HDMI to VGA converter will only suffice up to a certain refresh rate or resolution, so something a bit higher end might be necessary since you're on the hunt for bigger and better CRTs. I've never had a problem getting modern signals working on HD compatible CRTs. I prefer to run everything at around 720p, depending on the monitor. Sometimes it's 1280 by 1024, but for the most part, I really just run either at 480p or 720p. And any of the converters that are in the Amazon store that I have linked to have done a great job for me, especially with just standard resolutions. The ones I linked to will also work mostly, in case you get the rare time that you would get a bum one that maybe doesn't work, or if they switch the board. But the specific reason I linked to those is because they can handle from 240p all the way up to 1080p, and all of them have worked great with 720p as well. So if you're looking to take an HDMI signal and use it on an HD CRT, I would probably look into those. Oliver Clare wants to know if I could give my thoughts on finding a good PVM or BVM monitor that won't require me to sell my car to afford it. Are there any other alternatives, and anything you could look into besides eBay? Honestly, pick any CRT. Anything. You mentioned that you're in the UK, so I'm sure you could find a CRT with a SCART input, so that means you already have RGB access right there. But I think I got really caught up for a while about talking about how much I love PVMs and BVMs, and for a while I really forgot to always mention how much I liked just regular consumer grade TVs, and I think I may have given off the wrong impression about that. I never disliked consumer grade TVs. I just, I liked talking about the crazier stuff, and I've tried really hard in the past year or so to try at least to get the word out there that if you're looking for an accurate retro gaming experience, any CRT is an excellent choice, even one with just composite video input. And very oftentimes, especially with games that are, or even consoles too, that rely heavily on dithering, like PlayStation 1, just composite video on a CRT is an excellent, excellent choice. So my first piece of advice would just be get any CRT at all and enjoy it, and then keep your eyes open for a PVM or BVM. But honestly, I mean, these things are getting way more scarce. So many of them went to recycling centers years ago. The ones that are left over are either sold by scalpers in really bad condition, or they have been completely rebuilt, and it absolutely is worth all of the extra money for it. So sorry, I don't have any better advice for you, but definitely just pick up any CRT and then just kind of keep your eyes open. Check any local studios, especially indie studios that might have them left over. The other thing that you have to remember as well is a lot of people spent $5 to $20 grand on these monitors when they bought them, and have no idea that people were selling them for nothing and giving them away a few years ago. So it's also very common that you'll see a video studio, selling a PVM that's used for $3,000 because they think that's still worth that much. So it's not just scalpers, it's not just the rarity, and it's not just people that have already rebuilt them and deserve the money. It's just also people that don't understand that the value dropped and then are going back up. So, good luck. It's a pain. I always just keep my eyes and ears open, and I try to snatch up anything I could afford. And hopefully everything that I pick up will eventually be in some kind of museum or public setting where people could experience them. My goal has never, ever been to hoard these things away. Well, I guess technically they have. My goal has been to hoard these away so that I could then restore them and present them to people in a way where you could all enjoy them, not just have some pile in my basement that I'm snickering over or something like that. So good luck in your search, but definitely just grab any CRT, especially if you can get one with RGB input on it. Well, that's it for this time. As always, thanks to everybody that participates in these. I really enjoy doing them. And of course, thank you to everybody that supports, because without your support, none of these videos or any of the research or any of the craziness I'm involved in could happen. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week.